Hi friends, it's so lovely to see you all here. And welcome to this night of discussion with Yanis Varoufakis and Dr. Randa Abdel-Fattah. To start us off this evening, I'd like to welcome Binui Bailey to the stage to do a welcome to country. Thank you, Binui.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for your leadership, advocacy and staunchness. It's the courage. Thank you. Thank you. Before I begin this evening's Welcome to Country, I'd like to share with you a greeting. It's a greeting in the language of the Aboriginal people of Sydney. So when I greet you, I would love for you to greet me back using the same word. So to say hello, we say Warrami. Can you say Warrami really loud on 3? I should have given better instructions. Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Warrami! Yeah, I felt that. Deadly. I'm going to speak in language now. And when we speak in language, the essence of my welcome to countries that I've been taught from my elders is we are asking the ancestors and creator spirits. We are asking them for blessings, for guidance and protection. I will also just share with you some information which is protocol about the land that you're visiting this evening. So, Budirinyuin, good evening. Ngaya bimbibila binui, ngaya garagal nyura. Ngaya wayenga iora wanarua bandilang nyura. Ngaya biana birigaba kangalu waka waka wuli wuli nyura. Ngaya ngi binui miti miti ngaya red fern garagal nyura. So assuming you know what I said, I think I'm done. I'm just gammon, I'm joking. So why did I speak that language to you when you cannot understand it? Because it's the language of Sydney and we have to celebrate it in order to preserve it. And I really want to revive language and preserve language, so for all Australians, for all Australians. Thank you. So please remember the few words I teach you this evening. So I must translate. Let me translate. Okay. So I said my name is Binui, which is an Aboriginal word from my dad's side of the family in North Queensland, and it means Mother Earth or fertility. My mum's family come from here in Sydney, and we can trace her maternal side back to 1824 to the Hawkesbury Natives Camp. And then since then, they were all migrated, taken into various institutions, the Bomaderry, Cootamundra, Parramatta Girls' Homes, and into Kinchler and Mittagong for the men. And then they migrated to Redfern. And that's where my family has been for 8 generations. And that's why they call me Binny from the block. Okay. But I am, my mum's family are connected to the Eora, Wanarua and Bundjalung nations of New South Wales. And then on my dad's side, Birigaba, Gungaloo, Waka Waka and Woolly Woolly nations from southeast to North Queensland. What does all of that mean to you? Well, it just means I've got a really big mob and I'm right for a bed and a feed anywhere I go from Redfern to Cairns. But I am here today with the blessing of my elders. And I do represent the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and the Aboriginal communities within our boundaries. And I want to warmly and sincerely, on behalf of all of us, welcome you to the lands of the Gadi in language. We say, Wan Gadi Warami, hello and welcome. Wan Gadi Gamarara, welcome my friends. Wan Gadi Gadi Galnyura, welcome to the lands of the Gadi. Now for those that don't know, Gadi means grass tree, and Gal is the suffix for man. But they weren't all Gadigal men. So Gadi, the grass tree clan. Gadigal people identify themselves as saltwater people from sandstone country, and one of 29 clans of the Sydney Basin, the Eora Nation. And I want to just share with you a little bit about our totemic system here. We have the sand goanna is our totem for the Gadi clan. And the ancestral dreaming spirit is Gawara, the whale. So I hope I've taught you a few things about Gadi country today and inspired you to learn more about the lands on where you live and where you're connected to. Because as Australians, it's up to all of us now to preserve the culture. So let's connect with country, let's personalise our acknowledgements of country and show love and respect to all people. And thank you. I'm going to teach you 2 more words before I run. Can you say Gidirigora? Did you roll that R? Gidirigora? That means thank you. And the last one is Yanu Yanu. that means you want to see me again, which I hope is true. Have a deadly night. Thank you so much. Welcome to the lands of the Gadi.
Oh, thank you. What a great way to start the evening. My name's Leanne Minshull. I'm the I'm the co-chief executive officer of the Australia Institute. And for people who don't know much about the Australia Institute, we're a public policy think tank. We're based in Canberra and we've been there for 30 years. And I was thinking about it today and thinking, well, what was happening in Canberra 30 years ago? Well, it was actually in March 30 years ago that John Howard became our Prime Minister. I wasn't expecting that response. I'll try something else. It was March 6th or 7th, 30 years ago, that Pauline Hanson entered our parliament for the first time. Yeah. So I kind of like to think about that just to ground us a little bit in thinking about the cycles of politics. And from the Australia Institute perspective, we've been there for those 3 decades in just about every important public policy argument way back from the late 1990s. And I believe that the Institute plays a really important role in public policy debate. We're thought leaders. We come up with big ideas and we know how to take a point and point it at power. And we can't do that without the help of our supporters and people that other stakeholders that we know that are very generous in giving us their time. So then I thought, well, why are we here tonight? What brought us here tonight? And we were supposed to not be here tonight. We were supposed to be in Adelaide at the Adelaide Writers' Week. Yeah. But on January 9th, so think about that, was only 8 weeks ago that the Adelaide Writers' Festival decided to try and silence Randa. Yep. By rescinding her invitation to speak. And very shortly after that, I think Yanis was one of the first writers to quite dramatically rip up his invitation and say, I am not coming. And then the Australia Institute is a major sponsor of the Adelaide Writers' Week, and I think that we were one of the first, if not the first, to withdraw our sponsorship from the festival. And thank you. And to also say that none of our staff would be appearing at any of the panels. And of course, all of the staff who are authors in their own right who work at the Institute, like Amy Ramekis and Richard Dennis and Greg Jericho and other people that I'm sure that you will know, had already rung me and said, I don't care what the Institute does, Leanne, I'm not going to that bloody festival. It was stronger language than that. And so we kind of thought, well, Yanis has got a week free. The guy's probably got a busy diary. Can we do something? So Richard rang Yanis and asked if he'd come over and he agreed to it, which was, really generous. And then I also... Sorry? Oh, sorry, I don't mind a heckle. I just didn't catch what you said. But watch out, I've done stand-up comedy, so... So we called Yanis. Yanis agreed to come over. And, whilst I really appreciate the fact that Randa and Yanis have both made time to be here, I also want to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that people from all over Australia just opened their hearts and wallets and threw in anywhere from $50 to $500 to make sure that Yanis could get over here. And in fact, we did so well, we thought, oh well, bugger Adelaide, we'll take the show on the road. So that's why we started in Adelaide, which I heard was good. We went to Melbourne. I was in the audience for that last night. That was very good. But this is the last show of the week and it's going to be the best in my hometown, Sydney. So thank you so much. And before I introduce our first speaker, Randa, I also want to appreciate everybody who's in this hall because there's a lot of other things you could have done tonight and it's going to be an interesting talk, but it's going to be a challenging talk. We're not talking about fashion or maths. We're going to talk about things like authoritarianism and fascism, and we can't think any longer that it's not here. Well, if ever we could, we certainly can't now. It's not just something that happens in the UK with Farage or something that happens in the US with Trump. Anybody who's tried to raise their voice or raise their soul over the past year will know that we're very good at casual things in Australia. We've got casual racism, casual misogyny, and now I think we've got casual fascism, and that is going to coalesce to a much bigger force if we don't stand against it. So thank you for coming out, and before I talk to you about Randa, I want you all to give yourselves a clap. So, Randa is an award-winning author, academic, human rights advocate, and former lawyer. She's a Palestinian Egyptian Muslim woman. She has translated her academic work into stories which reshape dominant narratives around race, human rights, multiculturalism, and identity in popular culture. Please welcome Randa.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the Australia Institute for inviting me and platforming me today. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we're gathered today, the Gadigal people, to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to affirm that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. In an interview for Middle East International in 1971, the famous Palestinian writer Ghassan Kanafani was reflecting upon his role as a novelist in the Palestinian resistance movement. He said, "Day after day, comrades are killed and then they are forgotten because others are killed. This makes it difficult to continue writing. It is as if the novelist is suspended and his generation, his comrades, are passing him by, advancing faster than he is. Therefore, there are times when a novelist can't write. On the other hand, there are times that the novelist can't stop writing. The novelist lives, therefore, with this kind of contradiction, a kind of suffering." I have felt this contradiction, this kind of suffering, acutely as a Palestinian writer and academic since 7 October. In fact, I felt it in the last few days writing this speech, as our people and homelands are ravaged by the US-Israeli death machine across Iran, Palestine, Lebanon, and across a region that is seen as no more than the geopolitical playground of white supremacist capitalists who either rape and traffic children or kill them with their bombs. I started writing my novel Discipline in 2021. I wanted to explore the cost of silence and cowardice, especially among liberals who posture and self-idealise as progressive. After 7 October, I was suspended above a daily stocktake of apocalyptic horror, of a people's live-streamed annihilation. I would sit down to write, and news of another unfathomably sadistic Israeli war crime, of which our government is an accomplice, would pop up in my chats or social media. And so there was a period I couldn't write. Today, on day 880 of Israel's genocide of my people in Gaza, I wanted to share how I moved from writing paralysis to being unable to stop writing via the Genocide Convention and the 1929 Burak Wailing Wall Revolt. I'm sharing this because the psychological cost of the world we live in is immense. What is expected of us is not normal. To go to work, to engage in small talk in the coffee queue, exists as if 1,000,000 times a day you are not confronted with the fact of your dehumanization and attempted annihilation. So to write is to resist. In 2024, students at Melbourne University encampment named the Arts West building Mahmoud's Hall in honour of Mahmoud Al-Nouk, a student from Gaza who was awarded a scholarship to Melbourne University. If you look up his Twitter account, you will find distilled into his timeline an anatomy of genocide before and after 7 October. His timeline is a living archive of Israel's pre-7 October slow genocide of Gaza and the impact of the blockade. From 7 October 2023, Mahmoud was using the hashtag Gaza under attack. His timeline, real-life testimony, was a frenzy of desperation to find the Western world's red line. When the death toll was 400 children, Mahmoud was beside himself. I wonder what he would say now. But then on 13 October, he tweeted hashtag genocide. A second tweet that day, Gaza genocide. End the madness. What is Mahmoud telling us? The International Court of Justice, all these legal institutions and structures serve a purpose, but they have become the dirty, shaky floor, not the ceiling of justice. Because Mahmoud did not need to wait for an international legal body to name the facts on his ground. Less than a week of Israeli violence, Mahmoud concluded #genocide, and it was contemporaneous, undoctored witness testimony. It was a brown body telling a white world, I will name my reality, I will demand my measure of justice, and I will tell you what is happening in my own words. Israel murdered Mahmoud and 20 of his family members in their apartment on 22 October. There's no witness protection program for Palestinians when Israel is granted impunity to commit the witnesses. When I heard of Mahmoud's death, I searched for him on X and I saw something that made me weep for hours. Follow back. He would have been in Gaza, excited about coming to Australia on a scholarship. I don't know how he came across me or why he followed, but that follow back reminded me that in a time of mass slaughter, it can be easy for us to get lost in the metrics of genocide. There is something quite grotesque about counting in a time of genocide. Sometimes we hear over 100,000, approximately, some 10% of the population, just under, and one wonders who becomes counted and who becomes lost in the dehumanization of approximation. The Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part. So I found that a way to honor the suffering I felt as a writer suspended above ongoing genocide was to invest my artistic energy thinking about the individual parts that make up the incomplete sum. And that is precisely the job of the artist. In my book, I focused on the individual parts that make up the monstrous, incomplete sum of dispossession, exile, racism in two of the most repressive and contested institutional arenas, academia and the media. My two protagonists are entangled in racial structures, dehumanized and racialized. They are forced to learn the language of their institutions, free speech, democracy, neutrality, forced to maintain the pretense that such language has meaning, and sometimes forced to use such language back against the system. Like the figure of Caliban in Shakespeare's The Tempest, who in post-colonial theory is a powerful metaphor for the colonized subject who is forced to learn the colonizer's language and appropriates it to speak back. When we say Gaza has exposed liberal democracy, we are not simply talking about rancid hypocrisy. We, the colonized, are taking the language of liberal democracy and exposing how eloquently it articulates violence and enunciates oppression. Who is free to speak? Who is free to think? Whose safety counts? How are you neutral about 2,000-pound bombs on hospitals, refugee camps, and schools? We live in a time when to talk about the material facts of genocide in eyewitness testimony is being criminalized. James Baldwin said to his oppressor, I can't believe what you say because I can see what you do. Western states are insisting that we believe what our enemies say despite what we see them doing, that words override deeds. When I felt ready to return to my manuscript and finish my book, the material reality of Zionism, manifested in genocide in Palestine and anti-Palestinian racism here, was advancing faster than my pen could keep up. There were moments which force you to confront the self-idealization we artists can insufferably lean into. We want to write something profound, something new. The artist in me sat down and thought, what can I do? What new book can I write? But this is the genius of the Zionist project in Palestine and of the white supremacist project worldwide. It is violence on an ongoing loop, rendered banal. Remember Kanafani's words, as soon as the novelist begins to write, he discovers that his writing belongs to the past, even if he is attempting to write about the future. And as I wrote Discipline, I understood that our story has always been told against the weight of forces working to manufacture not simply consent for our erasure and elimination, but desensitization to it. It felt impossible to write something new because for almost 100 years, the goal has been to normalize violence against Palestinians. And instead of asking myself, how do I narrate this violence differently, I instead embraced the patterns, the repetitions, the caricatures. In August 1929, there was a revolt at the Burak Wailing Wall, which spread to other cities and towns throughout Palestine. The British Mandate power changed the laws and the judiciary to trial those arrested under criminal murder charges in order to guarantee a process devoid of politics, suppressing any political motivations to the revolt. Only British judges were allowed, all Palestinian judges were removed, on the grounds of avoiding any harm to public security. The terms of reference of the Commission of Inquiry into the riots were deliberately confined to look only at immediate causes, not the wider political motivations. And if this is starting to sound eerily familiar to you in light of the rhetoric of social cohesion, the Royal Commission, which has not heard from a single Palestinian and seems likely it won't, parliamentary inquiries, then it should. Throughout the entire process, the British judges denied the defence permission to submit any material that could put the riots in a political perspective. There's a continuity between this racist suppression of our right to name our political reality, to testify and diagnose on our terms, and the racist suppression of our rights and voices today. As an academic, I'm researching the archive not as a place to recover the past, but a way to engage with some of these legacies and traumas pressing down on us on our present. It helps me understand as an artist that the present we occupy and able to define it from within. American filmmaker Ava DuVernay writes, "I keep thinking about the moment when language breaks eye contact with truth, when we look away and words lose their meaning because they stop answering to what they see." As an artist, I'm inviting my readers to maintain that line between language and truth. I'm insisting my reader refuse to look away from the direct testimony of my characters. When I think about the lengths the British went to in order to suppress testimony, cleave language from reality, then I understand that every aspect of existence as a Palestinian is profound, because our mundane existence, the material realities of our everyday lives, whether under occupation, apartheid, in refugee camps, or the diaspora, has always been denied, deliberately obscured. And so art in this moment is testimony, victim impact statement, freedom to narrate, accuse, expose. And so in this moment, I ask all of us only one thing: to insist and to live untamed, unmuted, uncontrolled, and undisciplined. Thank you.
I think they like you, Randa. Who on earth would try to stop that voice and that thought process? Both because of everything that it gives us, everything that it provokes in us, and also the futility of trying. We are not going to stop Randa from speaking. Just one thing I forgot to mention when I was doing Randa's introduction was that she actually ran as a candidate for Unity Let's Stop Pauline Hanson in 1998 in the seat of Wills. So I'm going to say a few things about Yanis before I invite him up to the podium. I'm going to do it this way because last night in Melbourne, Louise Adler, who was doing the emceeing, just said his name and the whole crowd erupted. So just wait. Let me say a few things. So he's an economist, a former finance minister of Greece, and author of numerous best-selling books, including Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism, which he did a book tour with the Australia Institute. He was born in Athens in 1961 and for many years a professor of economics in Britain, Australia and the USA before he entered politics. He is co-founder of the international grassroots movement DM25 and a professor of economics at the University of Athens. And please welcome Yanis.
What a great honor to be following these wonderful women, Randa and Leanne. And what a great pleasure to be back in Sydney, because I am a Sydneysider. I spent 12 years here. I think I paid my dues. I qualify as one of you. I really enjoyed Adelaide. Melbourne was lovely. But when I hit the ground at Kingsford Smith, I felt that I was coming home. So thank you so much. You know, during those 12 years, I arrived in this country, a refugee from Thatcher's Britain. I'm a perpetual refugee, you know. Then I became a refugee from John Howard. Then I ended up being the finance minister of Greece, and I became a refugee from everywhere. But I was reminded during the welcome to country today, and what a wonderful welcome to country we had, that during those 12 years I was here, I never experienced a welcome to country ever. I was in hundreds or thousands of meetings like this. I gave lectures, I listened to lectures. Never was there a welcome to country. So let me also acknowledge the land of those wonderful people and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It strikes me that, you know, we have Randa here, we live at a time when the moral clarifier of this generation is the stance we take regarding Palestine. If this was 1938, the moral clarifier would be, are we defending Jewish life from the Nazis? Today, are we defending the Gazans, the people from the West Bank, the people from East Jerusalem, of South Lebanon, of Iran today? And of course, the connection with welcome to country, with acknowledging this land, is so obvious. Terra nullius. What did the Brits do when they arrived here? They looked at this great land and they said, we want it. And then they looked at millions of natives and said, this is a land without a people, for a people without a land, which is exactly what the Zionist mantra is. So, you know, here in Australia, we should have a very deep understanding of what's happening in Randa's land. And your presence today is greatly, greatly satisfying, because it seems that this message, even if it's not conscious, is coming through the cracks of a very racist, Zionist approach. I mean, I was in Berlin some time ago, before I was banned from entering Germany. No, I was banned from entering Germany. You know why I was banned from entering Germany? Because DiEM25, our movement, and me personally, we had the audacity of organizing a very subversive conference in Berlin under the very subversive title, A Just Peace in the Middle East. But that's not why they banned us. Do you know why they banned us? Because the co-organizers were German Jews. What they cannot accept, the Zionists, the Aryan Zionists, they can't accept the notion that there are comrades of ours who are Jewish who say, not in our name. And it was the Jews amongst us who were arrested by the German police. There was Udi Ratz, who had a little placard that said, Jews against genocide. And the Aryan police beat that person up. And while they were hitting this person, this German Jewish demonstrator, he was saying to them, would it be okay if it said Jews in support of genocide? I mean, we are reaching moments of utter absurdity. Now, before I came here, I had the pleasure of being interviewed by David Marr on Late Night Live Tonight, which of course shows that it's fake. It's not late night, and it's not live. On Wednesdays. Only on Wednesdays, right? And he asked me a question. He said, Yanis, you keep talking about fascism today. And he confessed that he understands why I'm doing it, but he also expressed a reluctance to use the word, the F word, to call fascism fascism. And I said, look, I sympathize, because up until fairly recently, I would talk about authoritarianism, the alt-right, proto-fascism, but over the last few months, I have managed to extricate myself from this kind of self-constraint, and now I call fascism by its name. And it has been, I've been thinking about why have I been doing this, and why have I written a book, which was effectively, the subtitle of this book was meant to be 5 women who taught me how to resist fascism, authoritarianism, and the male chauvinist within. Now, of course, my editors wouldn't allow that. So it became a really stupid subtitle, A Personal History of Resistance. It's not personal, it's about 5 women. But anyway, you know how it is with publishers, right? Don't tell them. But, you know, the reason why I felt the need to talk about fascism is because I performed a little mental experiment. I said to myself, okay, imagine that Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco had gotten together in 1945, just before well, Franco actually kept going until 1975, but let's say Mussolini and Hitler, and they wanted to write a blueprint for the revival of fascism after them, for the future generation of fascists. What would that blueprint be? What would the manual for fascism be for the 21st century fascists? Allow me to answer my own question, or relate to you the way that I answer that question. The first thing that they would do, in exactly the same way Joseph Goebbels did in the 1920s, and I mean that very specifically because I did read everything that Goebbels ever wrote in the context of researching a book 15 years ago. It was painful, but very instructive. Because what the fascist manual does, or would do, if it were written, it starts by adopting the Marxist critique of capitalism, the Marxist critique of crony capitalism, of banking, of finance. This is what they do. They go against the very mentality of big capital, big business, and so on. The next thing they do is they dismiss the notion of liberal democracy as a facade where you have different factions of the elites alternating in government when they are really nothing more than a uniparty. This is the more contemporary term. Immediately after that, just to confuse everyone, they adopt a highly neoliberal language, a language according to which the greatest enemy of society is civil service, public servants, the ABC, the BBC, the Australia Institute, all those institutions of the wet Tories as opposed to the neoliberals. The next step is that they try to unite, with a lot of success, we can see that, the victims of neoliberalism, those who've lost their jobs, who've been held behind, who are feeling the pain of deprivation and poverty, to unite them with people who are nostalgic of Thatcher, who are nostalgic of the neoliberals, of the neoliberalism that created those people. A very important instruction in this manual is never talk about austerity. Never blame the deprivation of the victims of austerity on austerity. Instead, split the working class between civil servants and private sector workers and promise everyone the return to a golden age from some fictitious past. And promise to make them proud again, to bring back this golden past on the basis of a Faustian bargain between the great leader, the father of the nation, who can be a woman, as long as she's an honorary man, like Margaret Thatcher, or like Pauline Hanson, or like Marine Le Pen in France. The idea is, I am going to make you proud again. I'm going to double or treble your lowest of pensions, which they did. Mussolini was the political leader in Europe that introduced pensions. First one. It wasn't a socialist. It was Mussolini. And increase minimum wages. Give women money if they stay at home. Because the great man theory goes hand in hand with misogyny, with the idea that the body of the nation becomes impure when women start having a life of their own and start demanding rights. So you can see how this manual is progressing. The next step is to portray our cities as cesspits of impurity, or crawling with crime, with brown people, with trans people, with criminals, petty criminals, with prostitutes, with women that are not staying at home. Once this great father manosphere is intertwined with racism and with a promise of purifying the body of the nation in the manner I just described, then they win. And they win when people like Anthony Albanese dive headlong into every moral void they find and end up in a situation, in a personal tragedy, where no one can believe a single word they ever say. Whereas when the fascists talk, you can believe that they mean what they say. You may not agree with what they say, you may even hate what they say, but you can see there is an element of authenticity. And then they win power. And the promise to make you great again, the promise to look after you, is betrayed. Because the moment they win power, the fascists go into bed with big business and big finance. So that completes the circle. In Germany, in Italy, in the United States, Donald Trump promised to drain the swamp, to shut down the Wall Street bankers. And what does he do? He picks up the CEO of Goldman Sachs and makes him, that was in his first term, Treasury Secretary, and now he took George Soros' right-hand man. The greatest enemy of the fascists is George Soros. He takes Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent cut his teeth with George Soros shorting the Bank of England. And he makes him US Treasury Secretary in exactly the same way that Hitler did precisely the same thing. And once they have betrayed their people, in order to keep their base as solid as it can be made, they start a war, or 2 wars, or 3 wars, or 7 wars in 12 months. It reminds you of anything. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the clasps of fascism. In the United States, in Germany, in France, even when they have not won government. They don't need to win government anymore when the Social Democrats are carrying out their own policies before the fascists get into power, unlike in the 1930s. At least back then, we had to wait. Now, enough of abstract thinking. I wrote this book because well, maybe the main reason was I was depressed 2 years ago. And when I get depressed, I do 2 things. Either I play the piano badly, or I sit down and I write. And I could feel that surge of fascism darkening my soul, darkening your soul, darkening our doorsteps. Very soon, the brown shirts will be at our door. It's already happening in Minneapolis, in Portland. It's happening in many, many different jurisdictions. It's certainly happening in Palestine. So I try to, reach into my memory banks and retrieve the moment when I was politicized and I was made aware of fascism. I have an advantage over you in that regard because my mother and father were born or raised during a fascist regime. I was raised in a fascist regime. And the first memory I had of being politicized by my mother was when she took me to visit, during the fascist dictatorship in 1969, her brother, who had just been tortured and incarcerated by the secret police, and we were going to visit him just before he was court-martialed. So this is how this book begins. Now, the interesting thing about my uncle, my mother's brother, was that he was a right-winger. He was actually on the verge of being a fascist, but he wasn't a fascist. He was one of those people who believed, remember once upon a time, Roosevelt referred to a Dominican Republic dictator as a bastard, but he's our bastard. So my uncle Panagis used to refer to the thugs, to the fascist thugs, as his bastards. They were important for maintaining liberal democracy and protecting it from the riffraff of the communists and the anarchists. So not only was he tolerating them, but he thought that they were playing a very good role. Until on the 21st of April 1967, these thugs took over. The tanks rolled on the streets of Athens, they overthrew the government, and they suspended the constitution and parliament. And my uncle, who was the CEO of Siemens Southern Europe, Siemens, the German company, he was very high up in the pecking order of political and economic power back then. He actually flipped. He lost it. He couldn't believe that his own thugs would be doing this. So he joined the terrorist organization and started bombing. He actually took a Samsonite full of Semtex and blew up the top floor of the Ministry of Industry. How? Because he was effectively running it as head of Siemens. So, of course, he was court-martialed and sentenced to death and all that. They didn't kill him in the end. Allow me to read my mother's interpretation of her brother. And that's how I'm going to end. Eleni was her name. Eleni had her own theory of why Panagis, that's her brother, flipped. When the axioms sustaining our worldview dissolve in the harsh light of brutality, she believed, our true character comes to the fore. The timid recoil. The wise are humbled. The cunning seek scapegoats. Women try to find fault in themselves. But men accustomed to power reach for its most masculine version to restore the shattered equilibrium in a world they consider their estate. Panagis, Eleni pronounced, was a cad on our rooftop. He was a cad when he championed our nasty post-war pseudo-democracy, and he was a cad when he decided to plant bombs against those other cads who overthrew it, democracy. Only when in custody, stripped of his dignity, did I see in him the decent boy I knew he was. Eleni trod a fine line between censuring and praising Panagis. I knew she adored the ground he walked on. I had experienced her grief during his incarceration. I sensed her intense pride that, unlike other men of influence, Panagis never bowed to our tyrants, choosing to risk his life and fortune to resist them. And yet, like an owl before an earthquake, Eleni was alive to good men's vulnerability to the corrupting influence of power. Observing her relationship with her brother was, thinking back, an effective inoculation against today's descent into incendiary identity politics that began with George W. Bush's doctrine, if you're not with us, you're against us. She knew how to love and to loathe him without allowing the contradiction to destabilize her, to make her lose her moral poise. I once asked her how she felt about his decision to join a group espousing violence, which I knew she abhorred. I never succumbed to the enormous pressure from friends and foes to condemn his stupid bombs, she said. Violence has its uses against beasts, like she mentioned an officer, who are always ready and willing to use it indiscriminately. I was more intrigued than ever. So why then call his bombs stupid, I asked. Don't you dare, she snapped back with a venomous look usually reserved for her brother during one of their tense exchanges. Eleni gave no quarter to anyone who dared dismiss her as meek. Though I had not meant it that way, my question awakened in her a memory of when Panagis had dismissed her objections to his bombs as the reaction of a jumpy female. As a chemist who had spent years on the floor of a fertilizer factory mixing deadly chemicals, my mother was not afraid of explosions. But to her mind, his readiness to resort to bombs came from the same place as his earlier deference to violent thugs. Once you look for solutions in the abyss that is violence, she concluded, the abyss swallows you, and it swallows you whole, and before you know it, you can't even begin to imagine non-violent resolutions. That conversation left me feeling self-conscious. How different was my boyish excitement at having smuggled messages in and out of Panagis' prison. I did that. I was 9. Eleni's magnetic words threw off course an inner compass which, as in most boys raised in patriarchal societies, was calibrated to point to the celebration of brute force. Eleni made me appreciate a softer type of power. That Eleni's power was silkier did not, however, guarantee us a quiet life. When Panagis debated with other men, their waltz was rehearsed. But with Eleni, a woman in the room, his fury was impulsive, authentic. The trigger was invariably her capacity to move swiftly from empathy that his illusions were dashed, to scorn for his assumption that society owed him the realization of those illusions. In nanoseconds, as he realized that her understanding did not procure approval, the backlash was on. From those thunderous clashes, I remember Eleni always emerging shaken, but with her wings unclipped. Soon after the collapse of the military regime in 1974, with Panagis free and back in his stride, Eleni entered municipal politics, where she was to flourish for 3 decades. She stormed into an arena where packs of men were eager to throw tantrums every time she challenged their entitlement or questioned their status. Employing a blend of tender mockery, plain speaking, and genuine compassion, Eleni held her own. Today, almost 2 decades after her passing, I wonder how she would have reacted to the upsurge of Donald J. Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Nigel Farage, Viktor Orban, and a host of copycats. Probably with a few cutting words and a telling smile. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually going to start with you, Randa. I want to kind of let some of what Yanis has said of his observations of fascism and the very different sort of history that he lived through than to what most people in this room would have lived through. And I want to start with you because when I was reading your book, Discipline, I was really... I don't know if it was meant this way, but as I read it, I was actually thinking of you. I thought, is this your life? And I got frustrated a lot at all the microaggressions that were put in the pathway of your of the people in your book. And I think it would be really interesting for people to get more of a sense of what does that feel like to be a Palestinian author in Australia at the moment?
Well, we used to talk about the Palestine exception in institutions where everyone else, bar Indigenous people, who have always been the exception and the blueprint for racism in this settler colony, where you had the freedom to express your political opinions, to express political analysis, to use the language of liberal democracy. But as a Palestinian, there was always a point at which you would not be allowed to continue, whether that was through mainstream media, pushing back on articles or interviews on the use of the word apartheid, settler colonialism, genocide, the gatekeeping around our voices in public platforms, and in academic spaces, the leveraging of diversity, equity, inclusion, the mythologizing around these Western liberal values of free speech and democracy and academic thought, but only to a certain point. And as a Palestinian, we've always been very cognizant of what that point is, and that is the point at which your analysis is overtly anti-Zionist, your analysis is overtly anti-Israel. you are speaking as a Palestinian, you are expressing your rage. I think particularly this intersects with gender as well, because there is an expectation that we as colonized people, as people bearing witness to genocide, and also as a woman, that we not present as angry, as full of rage, that we present and we offer our diversity in terms of food and music and, you know, photographs with hijabis on university manuals or in, you know, media websites. But the moment that you bring your politics, your analysis, the liberation lexicon of your movement, your rage, your emotions, then you are castigated as the angry woman, the angry man, and that becomes dangerous. And it's very important for me to scale up what I've experienced to look at this more broadly, because it cannot just be about me as an individual. You know, I am part of, there's no denying that I have paid a personal and professional cost as a Palestinian, particularly in the last 2 years, but I am part of a liberation movement. And that means that I can see that the organising grammar around the weaponizing of values such as you know, social cohesion or Western civilization, or the civilizing mission that is used against us to shut our protests down, to shut our dissent down, are the exact same values and justifications and rhetoric that is used to prosecute a genocide against those human animals, against, you know, the forces of darkness, against fighting the forces of light, against, you know, the barbaric, you know, swathes of Arab peoples. And so I understand that what is happening to us here is an extension of that wider colonialist imperialist project. And that's why it's very important for me to make those connections, because that language that is used against us by premiers and prime ministers here and policymakers and employers and institutions is the same justifications that allow for us now to witness, and over the last 2 years, civilized bombs dropped by civilized pedophiles on uncivilized homelands and peoples. And that is the reality of what we are facing today.
Thank you. I think one of the interesting things, and please just throw in with each other whenever you want, I want this to be a conversation, but I think what a lot of people are experiencing now is an expansion of that oppression, right? So a lot of the things that we're questioning as a society, which normally wouldn't be demonised, are being demonised. We can't protest, we can't walk across the bridge for Gaza, we can't question our politicians on why they're giving our gas away for free. Like, there's all of this that is really, you know, it's just going up a level, and I think a lot more people are starting to experience what you've probably experienced all your life. And in a book of one of our anthologies, Bravery, my colleague Polly Hemming says that fascism doesn't start with tanks rolling down the street. They start with a bureaucrat turning a blind eye to something that they see as wrong. And I'm going to put this question to you, Yanis, because just having you here for the last week, I've had loads of friends ring me up and they always ask me 2 questions. One is, could you please ask Yanis exactly what he means by raise your soul and how do you do it? So just how do you raise your soul? But take that on notice. But the other one is, what are the types of things that people can do? Like, if you were in Minnesota 2 years ago, rather than having to fight ICE on the streets now as they kill other citizens, what is it that people could have been doing? What is it that people can now do in Australia as we see the rise of fascism?
The answer is very mundane. The practice, the implementation of the answer is what is exciting, fun, and rewarding. And it's really very simple, community organizing. Community organizing, which is internationalist in its perspective. So not just a question of, you know, organizing people in Redfern and organizing people in Brighton Le Sands. You have to do that. But at the same time, you've got to understand that what's happening in Palestine is directly affecting your life. Not simply out of a sense of solidarity with the suffering, but a sense of the manner in which everything is intertwined. And, you know, take, for instance, Palantir and Oracle and these big tech companies, which very dispassionately, amorally, not immorally, amorally, with the pathos of a machine, of, you know, a piece of software or hardware that is no pathos at all. They train their programs in Gaza. Why? They train their programs in Gaza because in Gaza there is a densely populated area where bombs are falling and people are doing a lot of things. They run around, they die, they bleed. So there's a lot of data that is generated. And these companies train their AI machines, and they will be selling your hospital in your neighborhood, you know, software for dealing with emergencies. They already sold such a program to the British National Health Service through the Tony Blair Institute for £1 billion. So when we say, unless Palestine is free, we're not going to be free, this is not just a rhetorical schema. It is a reality. So never before has the old cliche, you know, act local, think global. Never has it been more pertinent than now. It is important not to leave it there. It is important to find ways of bringing together your community organizing with electoral politics, with creating a political party. You must abandon the ALP. The ALP has lost its soul. It will never find it again. Support the Greens, create a new party. This is what we did in Greece, okay? Everything could be different as long as we continue. And so that, you know, this is the automatic answer to the first question. In doing this, you raise your soul.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you want to put anything in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, Palestine, like we said, it wasn't the exception, it was the preparation. It was priming the world for what was acceptable, what were the red lines. That's where international law died. That's where the political economy of genocide, as you so beautifully expressed at the Gaza Tribunal, Yanis, that's where the political economy of genocide was solidified, and we can see it now. We are all impacted by it. And, you know, I hate to say it, but in a white supremacist society, there is no way that black and brown bodies can fight this alone. You know, there has been no change in our demands, in our liberation movements, language, in our political analysis for decades. What's changed now is that the ideological hegemony of white supremacy and Zionism has been exposed because people have seen, live streamed on their phones, the evidence of what we've been saying has been happening for decades. And now there's no denying that. And so it's on the majority to move past their comfort zones, to use their privilege, to really bring your solidarity in ways that count beyond just rhetoric, because we cannot fight this alone. And it is about community. But, you know, in order to take this on, we have to realize now that it impacts every single one of us. If Palestinians don't get freedom of speech, nobody does. If Palestinians don't get the right to life, nobody's going to get it. And we are seeing that now in what is happening in Iran and around the region. Every single lie that Israel and the US used to justify bombing hospitals and refugee camps and school kids, they don't even bother lying about it now because they could see what was allowed. They saw the impunity that they were granted. And it's on us as a globe, as people, to fight against that, to push back against that. And we cannot do that alone.
Thanks. Yanis, I'd like to ask you for an observation as a dual citizen of Greece and Australia, that when we look at the way that people respond to oppression and injustice, I think it was a few weeks ago, there were some American fighter ships arrived in Greece and there were Greek people out with banners that said, "Go home, killers." And in Australia, so many people don't even know that we've got B-52s that are more than likely nuclear armed now. What do you see for the reason between this seeming disparity between of how we respond?
It's got to do with our past, the different trajectories. I grew up in a fascist dictatorship that was instigated by the CIA, where, you know, my father was abducted from our home on the 21st of April by thugs, secret police that came in. They had been trained by the CIA. We knew it. And also, a few years later, 1974, the way that our dictatorship collapsed was because the American Pentagon engineered a coup d'etat in Cyprus together with our fascist regime to be anti-Turkish and to give, therefore, the opportunity to the fascist Turkish government to enter Cyprus. So we have been trained well to know that when we see an American vessel in Piero, you know, or we see the American embassy in the middle of Hudson, we know they're plotting against us. They made no bones about that. So, whereas you, because of the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Celtic connection, this country is maintaining, to some extent, the illusion of empire. That you're part of this empire, and to maintain white Australia policy, which is still alive, still kicking. They don't call it that. It's now against DII and so on. Yeah, it's about social cohesion. Huh? But you know, there is this delusion that still survives, that the threat to Australia's social cohesion, nationhood, comes from the brown people who are rebelling against the empire. But this is not true. You are a colony. This country is a colony. And AUKUS has cemented that status in the long run.
Yes. No, yes, that's worth a clap. And I actually think that a lot of people in Australia don't understand AUKUS at all. A lot of people don't even understand that the UK, the K is in AUKUS. We just see it as some sort of relationship with the US that is somehow going to protect us. But, yeah, no. But I just want to I actually would like you to expand a little bit on one of the characters in your book. So, who's read the book already? Just a show of hands. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there'll be more after this. But I often look at Pauline Hanson. We've got a tendency when we do community organising, and you know, we get organised against a figurehead or the head of the snake of some movement that we don't like, and we demonise the head of that movement, and it typically doesn't work. So it didn't get rid of Farage. It hasn't got rid of Trump, and part of what I worry about in Australia is that we will rise up against Pauline Hanson rather than rise up against the conditions that created the ability for Pauline Hanson to rise. And, you know, this is where the Institute's work, I think, is so important, because to fight back against fascism, we need a strong ballast of democracy, a safe environment, transparency, all the things that the Australia Institute work on already. But to get back to your book, one of the characters that really struck with me, it was in some ways a hardest chapter to read, because it was about Georgia, the grandmother of your first wife, was it? In Greece, and she was living with a pretty horrendous man whose name was slang for tobacco. Can you say what his name was?
Kapnias comes from kapnos, which means tobacco, because he was bitter, that's why.
Yeah. And there's an exchange in the book where you are sort of questioning her on, you know, it's quite the whole circumstance is quite tragic, and you're questioning her on why she doesn't leave him. And can you talk a little bit about her response to that?
Her response was that it's quite similar to the notion that white men are going to bomb the smithereens out of your family in order to save brown women from their brown men. So effectively she was saying, drop your liberal bullshit. You're not going to tell me how I'm going to defend myself from this Nazi. I'm defending myself, I'm defending my children, I'm defending my community from my husband and from people like my husband. And in the end, your hostility towards him doesn't help me because he's a monster, but he's my monster and I have to deal with him. The notion that Iranian women are going to be liberated today by bombing the living daylights out of their children and themselves from the sky by white men who don't give a damn about these brown women. That is preposterous.
And I think also, I'm really tired of hearing about brown women needing to be saved when Trump is the president. I think it's white women that need to be saved. You know, like if we're going to think about the situation for women in the Western world, when you have a pedophile and a rapist in the most powerful position in the world, and the Epstein files has completely shown that no woman is safe anywhere.
Yep, that's true. I'm going to ask for a little show of hands on who's read Discipline. Oh, about the same. Again, there will be more after this. In that book, did you draw? I mean, I alluded to the fact that when I read it, I was frustrated for you, and I kept having you in my head. But how much of that book was, in some way, autobiographical?
Yeah, like I was talking about in my speech how when I was writing, I realised that I didn't have to invent, you know, some unique original character. The senior manager, you know, people come up to me and they said, "Did you write about my manager in my discipline?" You know, or I'm like, no, this is the point. Like, they are caricatures of themselves. You know, the editor who silences and censors and uses brown journalists in a transactional way as informers on their community, but is happy to get them to do, you know, speeches on International Women's Day because they provide the diversity quota on that day. You know, this is a familiar story. Likewise, in academia, my experiences, of course, are poured into this book, but they're the experiences of many, you know, minority academics who, you know, think that who are subjected to these kinds of forms of having to regulate and tame and self-censor in order to climb the ladder in what are essentially white supremacist institutions. They're Eurocentric, they never engage with our knowledge production, our histories, our civilizations, other than to extract and mine them for diversity quotas or for metrics to make their university look better. And so, yeah, those microaggressions and those institutional structures absolutely correspond with so many of my experiences and the experiences of black and brown people in the academy and the media. And yeah, I didn't have to stretch my imagination too far. So it's kind of, yeah, I shouldn't say more than that. But I mean, the way that I cover myself is that if there is anybody that I work with who comes up to me and says, "Is that me in the book?" I mean, that's an indictment on them if they... So...
Yeah. I actually just want to finish off on this question, and I wasn't going to ask it, but I'm just so interested in what both of you are doing. And I'll start with you, Randa. What is next for you? What's your projects?
What is next for me is that I refuse to despair or surrender or give in. I will continue to do the work. And it's like what Yanis was saying before. It's about community building, and it's about the mundane. If you want to imagine the world that our children deserve, then you have to practice that world every single day, in every interaction, in every decision, in every economic choice that you make. So for me, it's about just continuing to do the work, a lot more in grassroots community, and I will not cede spaces. As violent and as abusive as these institutions are, they will have to drag me out kicking and screaming. I'm not going to cede that space, but at the same time, I want to continue to build alternative spaces, because I think all of these institutions are completely compromised now, and we have to do the work of not just defending ourselves and defensive, because that's the goal of racism, to distract you from building, just constantly keeping you in the trenches of defense. And so I want to build alternatives and landing pads for the next generation as well who face this kind of racism.
Thank you. And before we go to Yanis, just to go from the personal, which is political, I think there's never been a more dangerous but also a more opportune time to build a different reality in Australia, because the old political system has crumbled. I mean, there is the rise of Pauline Hanson, but there's the crumbling of the traditional right. I think that the Labor Party don't know what they stand for or where they should go. We've got a rise in independence. We've got no such thing as a safe seat anymore. So it is a time, if ever you want to be engaged in the political debate and making change, I think now is a disruptive but exciting one. So thanks, Randa. And Yanis, what's next for you, other than flying home via Houston?
Dallas, and maybe staying there involuntarily in some ICE concentration camp. I'm going to challenge something you said before I give you my answer. It's not true. You're giving them too much credit to the ALP that they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. They are selling out completely and utterly to the most horrific vested interests. They've surrendered this country to the American Pentagon, and they know exactly what they're doing. So let's not treat them with kid gloves that they're deluded little idiots. They're not. They are madmen in authority.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm up to? I always have a book on the boil. So that's done. I'm writing if you want, the sequel to my previous book, which was Techno-Feudalism, and it's going to be about war and peace in the techno-feudal age. I'm already writing it. So, and it begins with an episode of Star Trek. Now that's the book. I'm in politics. In 2023 we lost our parliamentary representation. We had 9 seats in Greece's parliament. We bombed out. It was partly our fault, partly a very successful campaign of demonization by the sordid establishment. But this time we're going to make it. And not only because we want to be parliamentarians again, but in order to give our community organizers a voice in parliament with 2 primary objectives. One is to restore hope, and the second one is to reclaim all those instruments, public utilities, electricity networks and so on, that were stolen from the people.
Well, I should have also mentioned at the start, and I'm sorry that I didn't, we were doing tonight in partnership with the Sydney Peace Foundation, and we're very grateful to collaborate with them on this and other projects. I'll also let people know that we'll be signing books outside, and Yanis and Randa will both be there to sign books. We also have the Bravery book from the Institute. The Australia Institute really can't do what we do without the support of people like you in this room and elsewhere throughout Australia. And there will be some people out where the book signing is that can talk to you about donating or becoming a regular giver or just becoming a supporter if you're not already, and get our newsletters and our invitations to great events like this. And we also, if you haven't seen it, we've started our own media site, a website called The Point, because we were so frustrated with mainstream media and having to come up with a new idea which would be news every day, when what we should be doing is talking about important things. But we're the Australia Institute, so we wanted to talk about it in a way that we could get the discussion going, create power, and then point it in the right direction to create change. So go and have a look at The Point, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And to finish off, I'd just like us all to thank once again Randa and Yanis.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.